In this video, we'll create lathe facing and profile toolpaths. After completing this step, you'll be able to create a turning face toolpath, create a turning profile roughing toolpath, and create a turning profile finishing toolpath. In Fusion 360, we want to carry on with our CAD/CAM lathe dataset. We're going to get started creating turning operations, starting with turning face. We're going to use this to prep the outside face of our part, and the first thing we need to do is select a tool. We'll go into our Intro to CAD/CAM lathe dataset, and we're going to select tool number 2. Tool number 2 can be used for general outside turning. We're going to select OK, and notice we get a yellow preview on the screen. I'm going to view this from the top, and we can take a look at where the tool is going, how it's moving into the cut, and how it's moving away. So you can see the tool gets to this point, moves into the cut, pushes its way to the center, and then comes back out. When we're talking about turning toolpaths, generally the facing toolpath will happen first. I'm going to double check all the rest of my settings, noting that by default, it's going off the model front. We have several of the clearance, retract, outer, and inner radii, and these are all the default settings that we're going to use. Then we have our passes. This compensation is going to be based on computer, which means that it's going to calculate the location of the tool based on the compensation we defined in the tool. And then we have our linking parameters, which determine how it enters and exits the cut. You'll notice that this one comes in at 45 degrees, and there's a linear lead-in length of 2 millimeters. If we needed more because we only have a millimeter of stock on the end, we could increase this value, and it's going to change this linear lead-in length at the 45-degree angle. We can say OK, and now we see an in-process stock preview. We can see our part inside, and we can see exactly what's been removed. Next, let's use the same tool to create some outside profile roughing and finishing toolpaths. Next in the list, we have turning profile roughing. Using the same tool, we're going to use this as an outside profiling method. We're going to make sure that the geometry selected is going from front to back. It's important to note that the back of our part is at minus 64 millimeters from our coordinate system. But if we simply move this back plane, the tool is going to try to roll around the back edge. So we want to use this extension distance. I'm going to add 5 millimeters, and I'm going to take a look at my passes section. You can see here that we're using a horizontal passes. It's going front to back. We're going to allow radial grooving. And then we're going to use all of the other default settings, such as make sharp corners. And you'll note that no dragging and use pecking is turned off. We'll select OK and just take a look at the results. So using that extension allowed us to take the contour that we were cutting and just simply push straight back an extra amount. This allows us to have a little bit of extra room when we're creating our parting toolpath. You will also note that the tool tries to go into the groove, and that's because one of our options was to allow grooving. If we go back to our passes and we take a look at the grooving setting, if we don't allow grooving, it's going to skip over that groove. Also note that we have another option called no dragging. If we use no dragging, that means that the tool is not going to come up this wall, but instead anywhere it has a vertical wall, it'll push down into it. So we're going to say OK. And note that now you can see what it's actually doing is it's skipping over that groove, and it's making a bunch of smaller cuts in this area because we don't want to drag the tool up the edge, increasing the load on the tip. Any other changes that we want to make can be done by simply editing the toolpath. In the geometry section, maybe I want to increase the tangential extension, and then we'll say OK. Now that we've created our roughing toolpath, let's go back in and select turning profile finishing. For this specific geometry, we could actually use the same tool, or we could switch to another tool. For our purposes, I'm going to carry on using this same tool. We're going to still do outside profiling. We're going to use the same settings, but this time instead of going all the way to 10 millimeters, I'm going to reduce that to 8. In the passes section, we're going to leave make sharp corners on. This means that the tool will come into the cut, it will move out, and then it'll come back into the next cut. We're going to use no dragging once more, and then we'll say OK. So now it's creating a finishing cut going down to our final depth. You can see it's leading into this cut. It's pulling away because we're using no dragging on this face, And then it's creating one final cut to go along this outside edge, going to 8 millimeters past the back of our part. From here, let's go back to a home view, and let's do a quick save before we address the warning in our browser. If we take a look at the warning, we can left-click and see what the warning is telling us. The lead out has been modified due to a gouge with the remaining stock. So let's modify this toolpath by right-clicking and selecting Edit. If we take a look at the lead out, you can see here it's the same as the lead in, and it's coming in at 45 degrees with a linear length of 2 millimeters. Remember that our roughing pass went 10 millimeters past the end, and this pass is only going 8. If we change that linear lead in to 1 millimeter and say OK, you'll notice that we're still getting the warning because it's still hitting this bit of stock here. One thing that we could do is we can modify the roughing toolpath to go a little bit farther if that's how far we needed to take our finishing toolpath. It's going to recalculate that, and then let's make one more adjustment. In the linking parameters, instead of using 45 degrees, I'm going to go closer to 90 degrees by setting this at 80. Also note that we have this allow lead to cut stock. We're going to say OK, create the finishing toolpath, and now because we're altering the lead in and lead out, and we're allowing it to cut the stock, we're no longer getting that warning. From here, let's make one more save before moving on to the next step.